St Joseph's Primary School. It was actually a new building, and of course the boys and girls had separate entrances. There were really two schools within the one building. There were 55 boys in my class between 1957 and 1963. Now of course in any school 1 plus 1 equals 2, but the ethos of state schools and Catholic schools, it was as much about not just religion, but a broader sense of tribal loyalty. Most Catholics will be familiar with the concept of venial sin, the kind that a loving and merciful God will overlook, and the mortal sin, the kind that gets you into hell. Now, how would a teacher go about explaining the difference to 10-year-olds in 1962? Well, take St Joseph's. If you shoot at a policeman and wound him, it's a venial sin. If you shoot at a policeman and miss him completely, that's a mortal sin. Now, of course, this was 1962. It was peaceful times. It was not meant to be taken literally. Yet the folk history resonates. We could have a laugh at that. But of course, within a decade, 1972, some of those 55 boys would be in the very new IRA and shooting at policemen. Now, 1963 was an important year. Selection for what you Americans would call high school. After 1945, another key part of the British labour reforms was the introduction of an exam called the 11 plus. The idea was that selection to grammar schools for academic training would be based on passing this exam. Failure usually meant going to a secondary school and a mix of academic and trade training, and not sitting the exam at all meant going to a secondary modern school for trade training. The idea was that grammar school kids would eventually reach university and become teachers, doctors, solicitors, and at worst have clerical jobs. The secondary school kids would have a trade, clerical, secretarial, and the secondary modern kids would at best be labourers and mill workers. Of those 55 boys, 13 set the 11 plus. Just 3 passed, and I was one of the 3. St Mary's Christian Brothers School, it's also on your map there, was one of just 2 Catholic grammar schools, and it was only a few streets away. A pause here to reflect that anyone trying to sell unionism or Britishness to Northern Ireland Catholics was holding 3 aces: the British National Health Service, the British welfare system, and the British education system, which could provide an opportunity for social mobility. Now, of course, this timeline runs alongside a civil rights timeline here in the southern states of the USA. And certainly in the early 1960s, nationalists were seeing parallels between the civil rights movement here in the USA and in Northern Ireland. Towards the end of the 1960s, a fully fledged civil rights movement was formed. Now, I don't want to overstate or understate the American civil rights connection. I think the biggest similarity might be that a generation of people, slightly older than me, were no longer prepared to be passive. Now, maybe that is the thing about civil rights issues, whether in Northern Ireland or USA or even globally, feminism for example, that there is just a time when a generation rises against the passivity or acquiescence of their parents. Now, as I said, American academics who visit Northern Ireland are often baffled by the fact that education was not a prime civil right demand as it was in Mississippi and Alabama. The reason is simply that Catholic education was at least as good and possibly better than the state model. Does it make any practical difference that 2 plus 2 equals 4 in a Catholic school or a Protestant school? No, but think about the study of history. Certainly when I first started to study history, aged 11, it was always a kind of struggle. England's historic difficulty is Ireland's historic opportunity. So with a 5-year curriculum, aged 11 to 16, which begins at Bosworth Field and the Tudors in 1485 and brings in the Reformation, the Spanish Armada, Oliver Cromwell, the Jacobites, George Washington, Napoleon, the Crimea War, World War I, we always tended to be hoping for British defeats. Now that's the honest legacy. British history is, with one or two exceptions, a story of unrelenting success. Irish history is the exact opposite. And frankly, Irish nationalism needs a sense of grievance. And history provides it, especially as taught by religious orders such as the Irish Christian Brothers or the Sisters of Mercy. Catholic schools were encouraged to be better. It was, after all, an unequal world for which children were being prepared.